It was the dawn of the third age of podcasting, 30 years after the series had launched.
The Babylon podcast was a dream given form. Its goal, to discuss the place where humans and aliens could work out their differences peacefully.
It's a port of call, home away from home for established fans, newbies, Jon, Blaine, and guests.
Humans and aliens wrapped in 2,500,000 tons of spinning metal, all alone in the night.
It can be a dangerous place.
Wait, what?
But it's our last, best hope for peace.
This is the story of the last of the Babylon stations.
The year is 2024.
The name of the podcast is
Babylon 5, 30 years later.
Hello and thank you for downloading this latest episode of Babylon 5, 30 years later. This is the podcast that is going through every episode and installment of the classic science fiction drama Babylon 5, 30 years after each episode aired. My name is John Wilson, and with me on this journey is my mentor and expert and, the guy who will, take out people, even an entire homeworld, if I ask him to, as long as you just do things one thing at a time. And all he asks for is if I ever hear anything about the outer rim of our circle of friends. So welcome to the show once again every week, Blaine Dowler. How are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm doing all right. I was really trying to figure out how to work the opening passage of Revelation into this episode, but I couldn't. I looked at the first few verses and there was nothing good to segue into. But we are talking about the episode Revelations today, which aired November 9th, 1994, 30 years ago as this episode is coming out. And, wow, we're trucking right along with the series, aren't we?
That we are, especially since we are recording more quickly than we're releasing, but shh.
Well, stuff is happening.
Mm-hmm.
And after a season of episodic storytelling, feeling like we're moving forward in a story with quite a brisk pace is a very different feel to the show. And you said it would happen. You said season 2, the brakes are off, which is, sort of a coincidental metaphor since Mindy's brakes went out on the car she was driving this morning. So, lots of fun with brakes not being on things.
Yeah, but I don't know how easy it is to gravity bleed Babylon 5.
No, we're not bleeding the brakes on the station. But yes, just to reiterate, we are talking about the second episode of season 2, Revelations, which aired on November 9th, 1994. It was written by J. Michael Straczynski, as always, and directed by Jim Johnston, who is, of course, a regular name at this point. You have anything you want to share before I dive into the storyline?
That's about it at this point, aside from saying that this is the second of the 2 episodes that originally had the season 1 opener when they broadcast.
Okay.
We'll talk more about that after your synopsis.
You said the second of 2 that originally had the season 1?
Yep.
Okay. So on the digital version that I watched, this also had the one partial replacement on the video that we talked about last week. So I expect that will probably change next week for reasons that we will talk about later today. So getting into this episode, wow, so many things. Of course, Jakar is still gone. He's out, gallivanting, trying to find out what's going on, investigating ideas he has about who might have destroyed the Narn outpost at the end of last season. So Londo is really frustrated because Deled is also in a cocoon, and meetings of the council, 2 of the ambassadors simply aren't present. And as competent as they might be, Natoth and Lanier are not their bosses. They are the assistants. They are the aides. They are not the ambassadors. So Londo Mollari is frustrated. Captain Sheridan is like his second day on the station, so he's frustrated with their frustration. It's not going well. I need to pick a storyline because there's only one storyline among all of these that even feels remotely like a B plot. Everything else feels important. So first storyline I'm going to talk about is Londo Mollari and Jakar. So Londo gets a visit from Morden, and they confirm with each other that nothing about the destruction of the Narn outpost in Quadrant 37 can be traced back to Londo Mollari, so the Narn Empire cannot come out against him. But at the same time, since Londo said, "I'll take care of it" before it was exploded, his name is being touted in high places back on the Centauri homeworld. So he is being elevated in the esteem of his higher-ups for things that cannot be traced back to him by their enemies, which is a great place to be. And all that Morden asks in return is that if Londo hears about anything going on the rim of known space, that he let Morden know. So Londo's like, "Sure, I can do that." There's a moment where Londo and Morden are, Londo's joking around because he's like, "Can you do this again? What if we need to do more of these little accidents?" And Morden's like, "Sure, just give us a target." He's like, "So you can just blow up the entire Narn homeworld?" And Morden's like, "One thing at a time, Londo," which seems to imply, yes, we can, but let's not jump ahead of ourselves. And that kind of gives Londo pause. What exactly is he dealing with here? So G'Kar is with several Narn pilots out exploring the edges of space, and he finds some ships that we have not seen before. He realizes that there are some people who are back in play, back in power that he was afraid would be out there. So he is able to escape from an attack, from a fight with those ships, but his other pilots basically stave off the bad guys while G'Kar escapes. So all of his comrades give their lives so that G'Kar can escape with the news. He gets back to the station. He sees Natoth. He tells Londo, "You know what? We're not going to be happy with our little feud until all of y'all are dead, but there's more important stuff going on right now. There's like a, larger danger out there. We might need to join up. I might need your help." And Londo's like, "Okay." And then, so G'Kar says they need to, he talks to Captain Sheridan. They talk about how they need to investigate some stuff out in the rim of space. They send out a investigative ship, and it gets destroyed because Londo told Morden it was coming. We see the ship come out of jump space, and the spiky black ship, the Shadows ship is what I've been calling it, is there and blows them up. And later in the episode, Londo realizes that the only person who knew this was coming was Londo. He doesn't say it out loud, but you can see he realizes that Londo is behind this. Londo, whom he went to earlier for help, he now realizes he's too late. Things are already ahead of him. So that's a big old bunch of stuff to play in the future. Delenn comes out of her cocoon. She's all stony-skinned. She gets Dr. Franklin's assistance. Evidently, the stony skin peels off, and she looks almost human after emerging from her cocoon. Her hair is flowing. The skull ridges are much, much less pronounced. They're almost plates on her skin in some portions. And after the discussions about, Minbari and humans being two halves of the same race, this is going to be interesting. Then, so we had the whole plot line where somebody tried to kill did kill the president. Garibaldi found out about it. Garibaldi was shot in the back. He's been in a coma. Dr. Franklin can't wake him up. So Dr. Franklin brings out the, not the blood transfusion device, but like the spirit energy transfusion device from season 1. And he and the captain agreed to take turns feeding their own life force into Garibaldi to try to wake him up, because no other conventional means is getting him out of the coma. And this works. Garibaldi wakes up. He can't remember who shot him because he was shot in the back, but they get Talia to help him out with his memory, because, of course, she's a telepath and she can help him probe things. And even though his memory revived by a telepath will not be admissible in court, at least they can act on it on the station. And they do. She's able to see that Garibaldi saw a reflection in front of him of the man who shot him. And, of course, it was his aide, who was in several episodes of season 1, whom he had taken under his wing, treated like a younger brother, taught him everything he knew, and then was shot in the back. So they go and arrest him, and Garibaldi confronts him, "Why did you do it?" And he's like, "Because I'm on the winning side. And you can be too. But there's definitely going to be a problem, and you want to make sure you know where you are." When Garibaldi leaves the interrogation, the aide gives him a "be seeing you," because evidently they have all watched The Prisoner from 1967 and 68. And they're making allusions to it, which we saw from Bester in season 1. So the president talks to Captain Sheridan says, "Hey, I understand you arrested the guy you think might have been responsible for killing my predecessor. I want him, and I want all of the evidence so that we can proceed appropriately on our end at the highest levels because we just don't trust this guy at all." And Captain Sheridan's like, "Okay, Mr. President, sir." And they hand off the prisoner, but then the ship with the prisoner and all of the evidence basically goes black. The prisoner is transferred to another ship, and they don't know where it is. It's not registered, and they've lost it. So that's all gone. So the last plot line that I think is the only one that I was considering a B plot is that Sheridan's sister comes to the station, and she is very happy to see her brother. It's been like 2 years since they saw each other. We find out that Sheridan's wife had died a couple of years ago, and Sheridan has had a really hard time coping with it. He blames himself for her death because they were supposed to meet up, and he couldn't do it. He couldn't meet her because of his obligations as an officer, and so she got on another transport, and that transport got exploded, and she wouldn't have been there if he had been able to meet her. So he's been blaming himself for 2 years. Well, the sister is able to show him a recording of a message that the wife had sent the sister before the meetup, and she had also been planning to not be able to make the meetup. And so she was on that other transport, and it would have been happening that way anyway because she couldn't make the meetup. And she just hadn't had the heart to tell Jon at the time and figured she would get to it later. So he finds out that he's not to blame for her being on the transport where she got killed. And he's able to come to some reconciliation with that. So I think I hit all the major plot points. Blaine, did I miss anything?
No, those are definitely the major plot threads. The only detail I would include is that Garibaldi recognized that gesture from his aide as the same one that Bester used. Mm-hmm. So after asking Talia to excuse them, he shares with Ivanova and Franklin a hypothesis that the Psi Corps might have been behind the death of President Santiago, and points out how convenient it was that President Clark, then Vice President Clark, got sick and disembarked at Mars before Earth Force One got blown up.
Which was a plot point we talked about in the finale of Season 1. But yes, now Garibaldi is noticing it and putting 2 and 2 together and hopefully coming up with 4. It looks like 4. It sounds like 4. We'll see if it's 4 as the story goes along. 4 rhymes with Psi Corps. So it's also possible that they're just all big Prisoner fans. I mean, it could be nothing more than that. And
it's worth your attention. For those who haven't seen it, it's streaming free on Tubi.tv. And past guest, actually our first guest, Paul Spataro, and the same crew that he was working with for Listen to the Prophets, Toon Trek, Keep 'em Flying, the shows about Deep Space Nine, the animated Star Trek, and Firefly. By the time you hear this, will have wrapped up their coverage of The Prisoner in their Village People podcast over at the Two True Freaks Network.
Yes. So go check that out. The Prisoner is a cult classic. Is it always really good? No, but it's always really interesting, and they do some pretty stuff with it. It is very artistic television, but it also is worth watching. There's a lot of really good stuff they do. So yes, let's talk about the key characters and the guest cast from the show. So it just randomly occurred to me as the credits were rolling in the opening that Bruce Boxleitner and Claudia Christian both have alliterative names, and they're the first two. So I think just from now we should have Jerry Joyle and Mira Merlin and Richard Riggs and Andrea Ampson and all the rest.
Okay. We'll see if we can get SAG to go along with that.
Yeah. See if we can do that. So our first guest cast member is Beverly Leach, who comes into the show as Elizabeth Sheridan, Captain Sheridan's sister. And she has been in a number of things. It's not clicking the right thing for me, so let's see. She is known for MathNet. Oh my gosh. She was on MathNet. She was Sergeant Monday.
Yes.
Oh, that's delightful. That's freaking delightful. Oh my gosh. Okay, so if y'all were deprived in the late 80s, MathNet was a pastiche television show for kids that was, of course, modeled after Dragnet, but was all math-themed. And I think it started out as a segment on 321 Contact and then got its own show or something like that.
Square One.
Square One. It was delightful. Oh my gosh. And she was Sergeant Monday on that, and my world is now a better place. She's done a number of one-episode appearances in lots of shows. Judging Amy, Mad Men, Criminal Minds. Look to see if she had any more runs on anything. She was in 3 episodes of Easy Streets, but as different characters.
Yeah, I'm seeing 15 episodes of Days of Our Lives as Bianca Torres.
Yes, yeah, so 18 episodes of Square One Television and then 19 episodes of MathNet. But it's given the same years of 87 to 90, so the MathNet show might just be counting the segments of Square One Television as episodes. It might not have gotten his own show.
It did get its own standalone, so they had some half-hour stories originally. Square One, I think those credits are incomplete because it started as a half-hour show, and MathNet would have been a few minutes every episode, so it was serialized over the course of a week. So you'd have one story Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and I know it was a separate show when it spun off into MathNet because there were cast changes and it lasted multiple seasons and they had multiple supervisors, so I don't think that was as well tracked because prior to about 97, but it wasn't until the late 90s when the IMDb started working directly with the unions to make sure the credits were accurate. Prior to that, it was 100% fan-supported and started in 1985 as a bunch of Usenet posts. It didn't get a web presence until there was a World Wide Web in the 1990s. Tim Berners-Lee didn't invent the World Wide Web protocols until 1991. So prior to that, it was all fan submissions, and they were not super focused on keeping children's shows up to date or other 5 days a week shows up to date.
Alrighty.
So the major network weekly shows tended to be fairly accurate, but you'd have errors. Like there was an episode of Cheers that I discussed on the Cheers cast on the Fire and Water Network, where it was crediting the man who played the lawyer from Jurassic Park in that particular episode, and it turns out he was not in that episode. He was in another one about 3 months later. So things like that. So it's a little hit and miss. They've cleaned up most of the errors, but there's still a lot of omissions. So I think there's just omissions on the MathNet.
We also had Macaulay Bruton back as Garibaldi's aide. We've talked about him before. This is, I believe, his last appearance on the show. I could be wrong on that, but I remember looking him up before and seeing this was the end of his tenure on the show. Of course, his ship that he's on disappears, so if he did come back, it would be a surprise. But I am looking and...
this is his last, yeah.
This is it. Okay, so Beth Toussaint as Anna Sheridan. She is known to Star Trek lovers as Ishara Yar, the sister of Lieutenant Tasha Yar from the first season of the show. At one point during the series, they visit Tasha's homeworld, which is basically a hellhole, and they run into her sister there. So that was the episode entitled Legacy in Season 4 of Star Trek The Next Generation. She was also in Red Eye. Her voice was in Scream 3. She's been in 9 episodes of The Young and the Restless, playing Hope Wilson, which is a very coincidental name. That's really bizarre. She was in 34 episodes of Savannah, and looks like she hasn't done anything since 2006. She was in Dallas. She had a season-long role on Dallas as Tracy Lawton, for those of you who know Dallas back in 1988-89. But yeah, seeing her face, I knew I recognized her, but she was... And we only see her in a video recording at the end of the episode, because she was... she's Anna Sheridan, and so she's the one who dies. We just see her recording. I'm surprised that the Internet Movie Database does not have the actor listed for the president. I thought he would be here. Well, you see if you can find him.
Yeah, if you do the all cast and crew, it gives you more complete, and he actually is the next in line. So there's 4 people that they didn't credit there. So Gary McGurk as President Morgan Clark.
McGurk!
Yeah.
Okay.
That's where we see Ed Wasser's credit as Morden.
So Gary McGurk was in Seabiscuit. He was in 11 episodes of Home Improvement as Dwayne Hoover. He was in Bugsy. Not a lot of big roles, but this is the first time that we've had like a one-on-one face-to-face conversation with any president, and the fact that he seems to be very, very plot important, I think, made the fact that we've had a conversation with him even more significant. He was in General Hospital. He was in 7 episodes of Young and the Restless back in '86. That's when I was watching Young and the Restless. And he was a tree man in an episode of The Wonder Years. But I didn't recognize him from anything whenever I saw him. I don't know if you happen to know him from anything.
No, I recognize his role on Home Improvement now that they mention it, but his facial hair was very different, and honestly, a lot of sitcoms lose my attention within about a season because I just find that they have that reset button and that status quo, which doesn't really appeal to me.
Yeah, it doesn't lend itself to long-term watching.
Yeah, especially with, a format like Home Improvement, where it's all about, the formula seems to be Tim screws up royally and learns a lesson, except he doesn't actually learn.
Right, he has to learn that lesson a few times.
Yeah, there's no retention for Tim.
He's one of those kinds of guys. You have to really, really smack him over the head a few times with what you're trying to get him to understand. But yeah, that kind of television, it's the sort of thing that I can watch, but I have to know what I'm getting into ahead of time. I have to choose, is this setup and resolution format so that I'm interested in pursuing? Like The Fugitive is introduce a setup, resolve the drama, we move on at the end of the episode. But I really, really, really liked The Fugitive. So, for those of you who might be curious, The Fugitive is available on archive.org, all 120 episodes, and it's pretty great.
I keep meaning to get to that. My understanding is that it also heavily influenced the Bill Bixby Incredible Hulk series that was basically The Fugitive with anger management problems.
I would not be surprised because, yes, you have somebody on the run going from town to town. You have somebody pursuing them. It's the same setup, just with a stand-in green professional wrestler for stunt work.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Fugitive is definitely worth watching. So, I think that is all of our guest cast. Of course, Ed Wasser is back as Morden, like you mentioned earlier. We've talked about him before. And so that takes us to the league in session. So, revelations. What are your thoughts?
I think it's time to tie back to things we have been discussing since The Gathering.
Okay.
So, when this first started, I mentioned that one of the reasons Mira Furlan's makeup was so much heavier as Delenn in that pilot movie is that Delenn was going to initially be male.
Mm-hmm.
If they were able to convincingly do that male voice correctly, this would have been the moment that Delenn became female.
Okay.
And as you said, yes, we have had a slightly modified opening credit. So when Mira Furlan appears in the opening credits, she's in her traditional look with the full bone ridge. When this was first produced, they did not have the budget to produce 2 different opening credits. I haven't watched episode 3 yet, but I suspect that'll be when they start using the original, where we see Delenn as she is now, in her half-human, half-Minbari form with that flowing hair.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why they used the season 1 credits the first time, was because they didn't want to give away her new look. And that's one of the issues with the DVDs, is that they quote-unquote corrected it. And when they released the DVD sets, they had the full season 2 credits on those first 2 episodes.
Ah.
So I was one of the people who was spoiled by the opening credits on exactly what that would look like the episode before it happened.
I've seen her new look before this. When we got to the big cocoon, and talk about her big change, and her most notable visual change is that we can see her hair now. I was kind of, internally deriding that in my head. I didn't want to mark it on the air, but I don't know. It felt like a whole bunch to just show her hair now. But I'm sort of taking implications that we're playing with possible human Minbari genetics now, not just Minbari. And so the change of appearance is supposed to denote something a bit deeper than just, oh, I have hair now. But they haven't actually said on screen what I'm suspecting.
Yeah, what they said on screen is that she is bridging the two races.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned it a minute ago, I forgot, but yes, the specific details about that are that she is now half human. That's why Sheridan's sister was asking, well, are the changes right down to the genetic level?
Right, which is where I got the implication that she had been changed genetically to half human. So yeah, that's probably, they have stated it without stating it. One of those things where they have given you the two puzzle pieces and you are smart enough to put them together. So yeah, she is now half human, which after the revelations of the humans and Minbari being two branches of the same race, that's kind of a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
But do you know, in the original story ideas, was her transformation originally also intended to be a human Minbari blend, or just the gender transition?
Oh, it was always intended to be a human Minbari blend. Yeah.
Okay. So Delenn would have gone into the cocoon as a male Minbari, who would have come out as a female half-human.
That's correct, yeah.
Interesting. I really wish they'd been able to pull that off.
So does JMS.
Yeah, that would have been neat. But, we have what we have.
Yeah, it was one of his goals for inclusion was specifically that, yeah, there was, he found that there was a lack of transsexual characters represented, and this would have been one of the first. It would have been the first time aware of... Oh, no, Soap had... I don't remember if the character appeared on screen, but yes, there was... Soap was very trans-friendly, or at least some of the characters were. They actually had the conversation.
And of course, I was young when this came out. I was like 15 when this came out, so I wasn't really aware of transgender people beyond jokes that teenagers make about stuff they've heard about, randomly. So the notion that they could have done a show that would have raised awareness, that would have been a good thing, because I would have needed my awareness raised. I'd seen stuff like the Trill in Star Trek The Next Generation, going from gender to gender, and I realized that that's a trans metaphor. To have somebody actually transition gender on a show would have been cool, especially in 1994.
Yeah, and the way the Trill was handled, their first appearance on Next Generation, when the gender changes, it destroys the romantic relationship that was building with Dr. Crusher, which I don't think they were intended to be anti-trans there. I think that was more, well, here's a fairly natural reset button.
Mm-hmm.
And it is fairly natural. People cannot control which combination of genders they find attractive.
And that's not the way it was written, either.
Mm-hmm.
The way it was written, Beverly was having trouble coping with the changes. That was going from person to person to person. She had fallen in love with one man, transitioned to Will Riker, and tried to follow the same romance with this person who had been her commander, and then transitioned to this other person. So it's one of those things that you don't have to read it as explicitly being anti the transgender romance, but it's definitely easy to infer that. It's definitely easy to read into it, and it's an unfortunate combination that we would want to avoid in a modern storytelling.
Yeah, and that was... The writers have since spoken out saying that it was not their intent to be anti-trans. You got their intent, but yeah, it is so easy to read in that some people have... Enough people have taken it that way that they felt they need to apologize for how poorly they handled what they were trying to do.
Right. So, yeah, Delenn's big change, of course. Delenn is now here. She looks a lot more like Mira Furlan, whom I have seen, in Lost umpteen times, and that's whenever I see Delenn, I'm seeing her through the lens of how she looks 10 years to 15 years later. So it's kind of funny for me watching her in reverse. Captain Sheridan. We're still getting to know this guy, and we already get like some tragic, spousal stuff. And it's just sad, because we had seen Sinclair find love again. And we find out that Captain Sheridan's wife died 2 years ago. And it's just, I don't know. It's sad. It's also, I have to tell myself to call him Captain, because we've been saying Commander.
Yeah, it's also something that JMS regrets. The backstory about his wife was inevitable. But in retrospect, he found that revealing someone's tragic backstory is a fairly cheap way to get the audience to sympathize with him, and he regrets doing it this early. There are reasons that story is a good fit for this episode, but he just found having it come in with the sister and doing it this early, it felt a little cheap, and he wished he could have done it a bit later.
Yeah. It occurs to me that the transition from commander to captain is going to be mirrored in another show about a space station a couple years down the road. Oh, speaking of parallels between the two shows, we mentioned last episode, or was it, yeah, I think it was last episode, how the whole idea that Minbari don't attack Minbari, and how that was mirrored with the changelings. No changeling has ever harmed another. I did actually just recently watch the first 4 episodes of the current season of Deep Space Nine, and that notion was said in The Search weeks before the Minbari concept was brought into play here. So that was probably not a direct copy from Babylon 5 to Deep Space Nine, because they'd already said it.
Probably not from the writer's room perspective. It is one of those ones that is contentious because it was part of the original pitch.
Oh.
So when JMS was meeting with the Paramount people, he went into a fair amount of detail in the 5-year arc because they wanted to hear it before they committed. So the people he pitched the show to knew that element was part of the mythos.
Okay. I wonder, though, and this is just speculation, because a lot of the people who started Deep Space Nine have moved on at this point, and they're going on to Voyager, and new people are in the show. And a lot of the stuff that they do with the changelings for Season 3 were not planned very early on, very much before the end of Season 2. So I wonder how much conversations from 1992 or 91 or whenever they first started talking about making Deep Space Nine would have influenced writers' room discussions for the 1994 episodes. There's no way to know, but it's one of those questions.
My question is that how many of those people that heard that original pitch were still giving the writers' room notes that many years in?
Mm-hmm.
That's my question, because you're right. The actual credited writers, as far as I know, did not have direct access to those pitch documents, but Paramount executives who were there from Next Gen through the end of Voyager and possibly into Enterprise did. So
right.
How much of this was coming down from the studios saying, we'd like you to incorporate this element? Because there's a few times where things that were in those original pitch documents happened on Deep Space Nine, 2 to 6 weeks prior to Babylon 5, which is close enough that, they're not seeing one and copying it on the other, because the production takes more time than that.
Right.
But you get enough of those coincidences and you start wondering, are they actually coincidences, or is the other guy saying, oh, they're building to that, let's get this done, because they knew the markers along the way.
Right. And so you get to similar discussions with like the X-Men versus the Doom Patrol. So many similarities on books that came out so close together. Were creative elements behind both of those books in conversations with each other? You have to wonder sometimes, because there's just so much overlap. But we will never know. We can only speculate. There are similarities. They're worth noting when they happen. Garibaldi waking up. I liked his reaction to the CO. He's like, I don't know you. And, Garibaldi is only on this station because of his friendship with Jeff Sinclair. That's why he has this job. And now his anchor to this job is gone. And he's going to have to cope with that. Now, obviously, he has built relationships since then. He and Ivanova have gotten to become friends. He is enough of a professional. He can probably do his job without falling off the wagon again. I'd say probably. But it's definitely going to be an adjustment for him. And I hope that it is handled more than just in 2 lines of dialogue. But this is a good starting point for that storyline.
Yeah, and I think to your point, like you said, there wasn't a lot keeping him grounded here. I think if Lise Hampton were single, he'd be going, oh, Sinclair's gone? Okay, well, I'll see ya. Heading back to Lise. Right?
Yes.
Trying to find a job on Mars. But his suspicions about the death of President Santiago will now give him another reason to stay and be stationed. And there is now, because it was Sheridan and Franklin were both giving him life energy, part of Straczynski's attitude that he never had a chance to really make explicit in the dialogue is that they now have this bond. Because even though at this point Garibaldi doesn't know exactly who it was and how he was healed, there is that bond that they have in common.
Like a subconscious draw or something.
Yeah.
Talia was present, but only just enough to do her job. She wasn't really doing anything as a character, just as a plot. Of course, when you have a superpower that must be used for the storyline, sometimes you're just there because of your superpower. You're not there because you're a person. And that's kind of where we are with her in this episode.
Yeah, and I think Andrea Thompson shares that sentiment. We'll talk about that more later.
Okay. Possibly similar to, and this is not to overdo the similarities, but just to draw a parallel with another show. Possibly similar to how Troy was often just there to comment on emotions that were completely obvious.
Could be something like that, yeah. Because as you're saying, like, really, there was a need for a telepath in this episode, but it's just Talia's the default telepath. If there were 4 stationed on Babylon 5, it could have been any of the 4.
Right.
There was nothing about Talia Winters as an individual beyond her telepathic ability that was important in this particular week.
So, Londo and Jakar and Morden. Side note, I did recently watch The House of Quark. So, seeing Natoth with the new actress, it also occurred to me that it's our first time to have a character recast without changing the character. So far we've had characters replaced by similarly functioning but different characters. This is the first time we've had a character recast with Mary Kay Adams under the makeup now for Natoth. And I did recently watch The House of Quark, where she had appeared just like 6 weeks earlier as a Klingon woman who has lost her house, and in order to get it back, one of her ploys is to marry Quark and make him fight for it. It's an episode that sounds completely ludicrous on paper, but it actually played really well. And Quark actually had some nobility by the end of it that you wouldn't have expected. So, yes, 3rd season, 3rd episode.
Yeah, if I'm remembering it clearly, it's, he didn't just say, I can't win. Oh no, never mind. I can't be remembering it clearly because the element I was remembering involves a character who's not on Deep Space Nine until season 4. So yes. I'm just going to stop talking.
All right. So Mary Kay Adams is now a regular on the show. And we talked last week about how, having had experience with the Klingon makeup, she was willing to undergo the Narn makeup, which is a much heavier ordeal, by the way. That's like saying, I have walked up 5 steps. I am now ready to walk up to the Lincoln Memorial.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like that. Okay, I did 10 minutes on the treadmill. Let's go do a marathon.
Right. So, she's a trooper. She did it, but it's kind of funny to hear that was one of her qualifications. She had experience with latex makeup. Well, yeah, but. Mm-hmm. But, the Londo and Jakar storyline. Jakar is back on the station. I wasn't entirely sure that he would be back by now. I was a little bit surprised that he actually made it back to the station this quickly. But I see how the story's unfolding. They need to move forward with what's going on out there so that the station can know, the story can prepare for it.
Yeah, if they're going to trust him. That's specifically one of the reasons that Jakar is the one who comes back with the information. Mm-hmm. Because his behavior in season 1 doesn't make people immediately want to take him and what he says at face value.
Good point. And in concurrence with that, whenever he and Londo are talking in the hallway, and Jakar is basically reaching out a hand of truce to Londo, and I realize that Londo is working with Morden and working with the shadows, I'm like, wait a second. Our bad guy, good guy dynamic has flipped. Because now Jakar is interested in joining forces against a greater enemy, and our happy clown, friendly Londo Mollari is in bed with the enemy. And I thought that was really interesting.
And that was part of the initial setup, because this dynamic is going to be the one that's intact more than any other dynamic between them through the course of the series. I'm not saying it's the one that we're going to have when the series ends, but we definitely have more time with this one. So the season 1 dynamic was done deliberately so they could flip it, because they knew this is what they were going to be. So they thought it's more interesting to the reader if you defy the stereotypical expectations and have them appearing on the other sides.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Season 1 being called Signs and Portents also could be called Prologue. But it's not really prologue, because you need the first 5 chapters to set things up before you throw a monkey wrench and everything. You know, you've got to have those initial setup portions of your story. You have to know what the world is before the world goes wrong.
Yes. Yeah, breaking the tables or turning over the tables and breaking everything in the pilot is not as effective as doing it once people are used to the layout of the room.
What else? Really liked the dynamic between Sheridan and his sister. I thought that they were immediately believable as a loving pair of siblings who, you know, had a deep, lasting relationship. And even though they had been apart for 2 years, they could just pick up right where they were. And she could be there to help him cope with stuff, even though she hadn't been in his life for a while. It's just, those are the kinds of relationships that I think mean the most to us. It's like, you know, the world is a complex place. We get separated from the people we love. But if we can reconnect with them and it's like we were never apart, that's a strong relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that definitely is the relationship that they have.
I did not look to see if she's a recurring character. I do hope we see her again. But it was very satisfying to see... Oh! Whenever they arrest Garibaldi's aide, he's just in a room working on stuff. And the entire crew, the security crew, has gotten word that he's the one who shot their chief. So they've laid an ambush for him. Somebody walks in and says, "Hey, you gotta come see this. Delenn's out of her shell. And she's like, got wings like a butterfly." And of course, at this point, we haven't seen Delenn, so we don't know where this is going. But he comes out, and it was just a trap, because everybody then ambushes him and grabs him and starts punching him. And Captain Sheridan shows up just in time to break it up so they can handle him a bit more officially. But yeah, I thought that was very fun. Very delightful.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a nice moment because, yeah, he was definitely being played there.
Yeah. I just saw that Beverly Leach, who plays the sister, was born in Paris, Texas, which is not too far from where I lived for 3 years. Sadly, she is not coming back. That makes me sad. Okay. Well, fine. What else is there in this episode that we can talk about before we move on to Last Best Hope? Are there any other elements that I've missed?
Yeah, nothing that isn't also going to be brought up in giving form to the dream.
Okay. So what is your Last Best Hope? Now, for those of you who are new to the show, the Last Best Hope is where we pull out a single moment of story, of character, or a single character, some element of the episode that kind of sticks with us after we have turned it off. What is a takeaway from this episode for you?
Watching this the second time through, it is that conversation in the hall when Jakar offers truce.
Mm.
The first time through, I don't know if that... It's been a long time. I first watched this on DVD. So, probably 2 decades instead of the 3 since the original air date. So I don't remember exactly what grabbed me the most the first time, but this time, now coming in with the context of the big picture in mind, that was such a huge moment of Jakar saying, yeah, we have insurmountable differences, but the common enemy is so much worse than either of us. This is what we have to do.
Mine was the other half of that. So you have that conversation, and then you have whenever he realizes that Londo is not to be trusted. So those two sides of that coin, he reaches out the hand of friendship, and then he realizes that that's not actually going to work. That felt portentous to me.
Yeah, portentous is a good description of a lot of this episode.
All right, well, speaking of signs and portents, we come to the part of the episode that we call Giving Form to the Dream. Now, I look forward to this every episode. This is not a spoiler section, but this is your signposts along the way. So those of you who are watching this for the first time, this is a list of elements from this episode that you might just want to stick a pin in and keep in the back of your head for later. So what are some things that you're thinking of here, Blaine?
Some of them are a little more obvious, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure anyone who's looking at this is going to say, okay, Delenne's transformation is probably going to matter.
Yeah.
And the fact that, as we've discussed it, her gender is probably going to matter. So, Londo's relationship with Morden is going to matter. The fact that Morden doesn't seem to think that bombing the Narn homeworld is a big deal, just not the time, is going to matter. The fact that G'Kar was the one who pieced together that, no, this is a very, very old race because it appears in the Book of G'Quan is going to matter.
That's right. That's a little element I forgot to mention in my synopsis is that the thing that sent G'Kar on a mission in the first place is there was something about the way everything went down that made him think about this ancient race mentioned in their sacred text, the G'Quan. And so he went out to find and found what he believes to be that race. And he comes back and tells the station. So the Narns have known of the shadow, or at least we are led to believe that the Narns have known about the shadows or who the shadows used to be for a very long time.
Yes, and where they used to be. He specifically mentions the planet Sahadum.
I did find it a little bit convenient that the aesthetics of the ships was one of the things that he thought was so indicative, because 1,000 years is a long time. 1,000 years is a long time, and architecture changes, stylistics change. Human civilization does things very differently now to what they did 1,000 years ago. Not just functionally, but aesthetically as well.
Oh, very much so, but there might be reasons that the ship designs don't change much in 1,000 years.
There might be. And certainly if you saw something that said, hey, I was looking for something, I have this picture that's 1,000 years old, and look, there it is right in front of me, that would certainly be something to make you sit up and take notice.
Yes. Yep. Possibly start a website about this mysterious doctor character who always comes, but anyway.
His companion is death. He brings a storm in his wake.
Yes. Then we have, obviously, the new Natoth. Mary Kay Adams is a good actress, but she seems a bit softer than the previous actress.
Yes. More subdued.
Yeah, JMS found that too. Less of the warrior strength. So Natoth will be used a little differently from this point forward. We have, the absolution of Sheridan's guilt over the death of his wife, who the specific mission she was on, the people who put together that trip with the Icarus, that was the ship she was on, were, they felt that they had found the remains of a forgotten civilization. This is going to be relevant. The fact that the ship was named the Icarus is going to be relevant.
Okay.
That in itself is foreshadowing. So when JMS is pulling names from Greek mythology for this series, it's about half and half between which ones are just cool sounding names and which ones have parallels.
Thematic.
Yeah. Like in this case, they thought they could do this, and then they failed. So the hubris of Icarus is part of that story. There's definitely more that I'm trying to put together.
And probably for the most part, active plot lines are not as important to bring out here, because things like, yes, Morden is going on, but yeah, stuff like the ship and...
Yeah, like I don't feel a compelling need to point out that, yes, they are now going to investigate the death of President Santiago, because, again, I think that's pretty blatantly obvious.
Right.
I think the only other thing that's a little more subtle is that now with what's happening with Delenn, it establishes that the technology to change someone's species exists in this universe.
Okay. It's funny because I, again, had just watched, it just came out a few weeks before this, not an intentional parallel whatsoever, but Second Skin, the episode where they try to convince Kira that she's actually a Cardassian dressed like a Bajoran, so she spends time in Cardassian makeup the entire time. But in Star Trek, changing somebody's species, on the surface level at least, is just, just do some surgery. You're good. And then we'll surgery you back, and there's no scars. It's all fine.
In TOS Next Gen and Deep Space Nine eras, yes. Apparently in the Strange New Worlds era, they can change it on a genetic level, although if that fails, you flip back in seconds.
Yeah. And I'm okay with that, honestly, because I want to get in trouble with some of the more purist Trek fans, but Star Trek's supposed to happen in the distant future. So the distant future of 2023. and the distant future of 1963 are different distant futures. And so having something that feels futuristic now, I'm okay with them having better technology on Captain Pike's Enterprise than they have on Picard's Enterprise. That doesn't bother me at all.
I am too. I'm one of the people that wasn't super bothered by the holographic view screens on Discovery.
Mm-hmm.
Partly because Discovery was about trying to reach a new audience. And some of my high school students who saw clips of even Next Gen were going, 300 years from now and we're still talking with Zoom?
Right. And like here, we just now started talking with Zoom. But to the Enterprise, now that technology is 400 years old, they can't communicate better than that. So, yeah.
Yeah. Now, some of that is because our current technology, people were trying to achieve what they had seen on Star Trek. Like,
right.
I mean, the cell phone itself was not motivated by Star Trek. That was motivated by making a better walkie-talkie. The person who created the generation of flip phone was trying to recapture that Star Trek communicator aesthetic. That was the whole point of the flip phone.
Life emulates art, emulates life. Yeah.
Yeah. But there's other things like, in this era of Star Trek in the 90s, they want to give you the impression that someone is swamped with work. They will give them 15 tablets to carry around instead of just one. When even these days, it's like, it doesn't matter how much work I have to do. It just goes in the cloud and I still carry around one tablet.
Right. Because why would you carry out multiple tablets?
Yeah.
But as much as I would like to do a Star Trek podcast, this is not that. Okay, so I guess that brings us to the end of this episode, unless you had any more dream to form.
No, I think we have hit on the main ones aside. Yeah, again, I think it's fairly obvious, given what happens when Morden is saying, hey, if you hear about the Rim, at this point, people know that, okay, the shadows right now are based on the Rim.
And if you look through a list of Babylon 5 episode titles, something of the shadows comes up in episodes a number of times. And so I'm now going to be keying into those episode titles and expecting important things from them. And the first of those is next week. And if all works out, we're going to have a special guest. I'm not going to say who it is yet in case it doesn't work out, but, hopefully we'll be here, next week for the Geometry of Shadows. And that will be out on November 16th, 2024, 30 years after it originally aired.
Yeah, so you might want to brush up on your linear algebra, specifically your projection matrices whose eigenvalues are 0 and 1.
Right. And also just the fact that those photons traveled 93 million miles from the sun just to not make it to the grass because you're standing in the way, Kevin, making a shadow. So sad. Anyways, so until then, talk to us, write us letters, send them to us. Blaine, how can they get in touch with us?
The most effective way is probably just to email Babylon5 30 years later at gmail.com. They can use numbers or the numerals or the number words for that. We've got all 4 email addresses.
Yes. You can also comment on the websites where the podcast is located. The first of which is my website, johnreadscomics.com, and there is no H in Drop a Line. Leave comments on the episodes posted there, or visit any of my other shows that I've been done over the years.
Yeah, you can also leave comments at bureau42.com. This is where my podcasts have been hosted over the years. And again, after the couple times, haven't gone into too much detail, but I have seen every episode of the series at least once, and I'm reading ahead on the scripts. John has not, so if you feel compelled to put spoilers in your comments beyond the episodes we're watching, then, please at least don't do that in John Reads Comics. Do it in some place where I can filter so that he remains spoiler-free.
The other way to get in touch with us is through reviewing us on your favorite podcatcher. We like when people say nice things about us. Tell me I'm pretty. Say the show's good. Tell us your thoughts on the show. Tell other people your thoughts on the show. You can do it at Apple Podcasts. We check that regularly. That is still, I think, the most popular podcatcher out there. But if you do leave a review on another podcatcher that you would like us to acknowledge and read here on the episode, just let us know through one of the other communication methods that you left a review there. We will go find it and acknowledge you and read you and thank you on the air.
And the last place that you can leave your comments is on YouTube posts. So all of our episodes are cross-posted to YouTube. And as long as I'm keeping up with our auto postings here, they will be organized in a variety of playlists, so you could focus just on the series, or just on the feedback episodes, or everything, or just one season at a time. it's all going to be set up that way. So the comments do have the anti-spam filters in place. So I may need to approve them. They may not appear immediately, but you're welcome to comment there.
Be back with us next time for the Geometry of Shadows. And until next week, thank you all very much for listening.
Good eating to you.